The old fisherman, Silas, warned me. He said the lake had a hunger, a deep, cold hunger, that the fish couldn't satisfy. I laughed it off, of course. Just another local legend to spook the tourists. I'd been fishing my whole life, from the murky bayous of Louisiana to the icy fjords of Norway. A quiet little lake in the middle of nowhere didn't scare me. I should have listened. The first day was perfect. The water was like glass, mirroring the bruised purple and orange of the dawn sky. My line hit the water with a gentle plink, the only sound besides the chirping of unseen birds. Hours passed. Nothing. Not a nibble, not a tug. It was strange. This lake was supposedly teeming with prize-winning bass. By noon, an unsettling quiet had fallen. The birds were gone. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness. That's when I felt the first pull. It wasn't the frantic jerk of a panicked fish. It was a slow, deliberate, impossibly strong drag. My rod bent into a sea, the line screaming as it spooled out. I fought it for what felt like an hour, my muscles burning, my knuckles white. This was no base. This was a monster. I strained, reeling with all my might, gaining a few feet of line only to lose it again. The water began to churn, not with the thrashing of a fish, but with a slow, ominous bubbling, a foul smell, like rotting vegetation and something sickly sweet, wafted up from the depths. Then, just as I felt I was gaining the upper hand, the line went slack. I stumbled back, nearly falling out of my small boat. I reeled in the line, my heart pounding. At the end of it was my lure, twisted and mangled, but also something else. Clinging to the hook was a long, pale strand of what looked like hair. It was thin and almost translucent, shimmering with a faint, greenish luminescence. It felt cold and slimy to the touch. I shuddered and threw it back into the water, a chill seeping into my bones that had nothing to do with the evening air. I should have packed up and left right then, but the fisherman in me, the pride, wouldn't let me. I came back the next day, determined to conquer whatever was in that lake. This time, I came prepared with my heaviest gear. The silence was waiting for me. It was even deeper, more profound than the day before. I cast my line into the dark, still water. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, I felt it again. That same slow, impossibly powerful pull. This time, I was ready. I dug my heels in, the rod groaning under the strain. The battle was on bat this time. It felt different. It felt like the thing on the other end was toying with me, letting me gain line just to rip it away with mocking ease. The water began to churn violently, and the stench was overwhelming. My boat rocked and I looked over the side. Just below the surface, I saw it, a shape, long, pale, and serpentine, moving with an unnatural grace. It wasn't a fish. It was too large, too sinuous. Then, for a fleeting second, a face broke the surface. It was horrifyingly human-like, but wrong. The eyes were huge, black, and lidless, pits of endless void. The mouth was a wide, lipless gash that seemed to stretch too far across the pale, bloated features. And her hair. The long, pale, glowing hair floated around it like a ghastly halo. Panic seized me. I dropped the rod. It clattered against the boat before being yanked into the depths with a final, violent jerk. I fumbled for the motor's pull cord, my hands shaking uncontrollably. As the engine sputtered to life, I glanced back at the water. It was perfectly still again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what was down there. It had my rod, my lure. It had a piece of me. I never went back to that lake. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still feel it. A faint, phantom tugging, a cold pull from a place I can never escape. Silas was right. The lake has a hunger, and now it has a taste for me. It's just waiting for me to come back, and so may days. I swear I can smell that stench on the breeze, a sweet, rotten promise of what lies beneath the surface. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more from the dark. Stay safe out there. They say some places hold memories, that walls can whisper stories of the past. But what if a place does more than remember? What if it watches us? Welcome to the story of the Blackwood Cabin, a place that didn't just sit by the lake. It stared into it, waiting. For years, the Blackwood Cabin was just a local legend, a dark shape against the shoreline of Cypress Lake. People whispered stories about it, tales of disappearances, strange lights on the water, and a feeling of being watched from its darkened windows. Most dismissed them as campfire stories, the kind you tell to spook your friends on a summer night. But every story has a beginning, and this one started with a family named Yash. The Astons bought the cabin for a steal. It was old, yes, weathered by countless seasons, but the view was breathtaking. Mark and Sarah Ashton, along with their 2 kids, Lily and Tom, saw it as a perfect getaway, a place to escape the city's noise and reconnect with nature. They spent the first week laughing, swimming, and fixing up the old place. They didn't notice the little things at first, the way the rocking chair on the porch would sometimes face the lake, even when they left it facing the door, or how the windows seemed to collect an unusual amount of condensation, forming patterns that looked almost like eyes. The trouble truly began with Lily. She was a quiet, artistic child who loved to draw. One afternoon, she sat on the dock, sketching the lake. When her mother came to check on her, she found Lily staring intently at the cabin. Her sketchbook was filled with a single, repetitive drawing. The cabin, but with large, menacing eyes where the upstairs windows should be. Below it, she had scrawled the words, "It's watching me." Sarah tried to laugh it off as a child's overactive imagination, but a cold unease settled in her stomach. That night, Tom woke everyone up with a scream. He claimed he saw a tall, slender figure standing at the foot of his bed, its shape barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. "It had no face," he said. Just a dark, shifting void. Mark searched the entire cabin, finding nothing. He assured his son it was just a nightmare, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the air in the room was colder than it should be. The next day, Mark decided to explore the crawl space beneath the cabin, looking for a source of the dampness they'd noticed. Prying open the old wooden hatch, he was hit with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. Inside, among the cobwebs and dirt, he found a collection of old, tarnished silver lockets, dozens of them. Each one contained a tiny, faded photograph of a child. None of them was smiling. A chill ran down his spine. These weren't keepsakes. They felt like trophies. As Mark emerged, pale and shaken, Sarah rushed over. She had found something in the master bedroom, tucked away in the back of a closet. It was a diary, its leather cover cracked with age. The entries were written in a frantic, spidery script, belonging to a woman named Ilara, who had lived in the cabin decades ago. Ilara wrote of the Lake Watcher. She described it as an entity tied to the cabin, a being of shadow and jealousy. It despised the happiness of others. It would start subtly, she wrote, turning small joys into anxieties. Eat, fed on fear. Ilara wrote about her own son, how he started talking to an imaginary friend who lived in the lake, a friend who told him terrible secrets. The diary entries grew more desperate. "The cabin doesn't want us here," one entry read. "It wants the boy. The Watcher calls to him from the water. I see its reflection when I look out the window, not mine." The final entry was almost illegible, stained with what looked like tear marks. It took him. I heard him laughing by the shore, then nothing. The cabin is quiet now. It is satisfied. It is watching me, waiting. A deafening silence fell over Mark and Sarah. The campfire stories, Lily's drawings, Tom's nightmare, it all clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. They had to leave. Immediately. They gathered the children, who were now unnaturally quiet, their eyes fixed on the dark, placid surface of the lake. As they scrambled to pack the car, the cabin seemed to come alive. Doors slammed shut on their own. The floorboards overhead creaked, as if someone was pacing back and forth. A low humming sound vibrated through the walls. A deep, resonant frequency that made their teeth ache. From the living room, the old radio crackled to life, playing a distorted, slowed-down children's nursery rhyme. Mark tried the front door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself was holding them captive. Panic set in. He grabbed a chair and smashed it against a window, shattering the glass. They climbed out, one by one, into the encroaching twilight. But as they ran towards their car, they heard a splash from the direction of the lake. They turned in horror. Lily was gone. Tom stood pointing a trembling finger at the dock. She went to her friend, he whispered, his voice trembling. The one in the water. Mark sprinted towards the lake, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw ripples on the surface, spreading out from the end of the dock, but nothing else. He screamed Lily's name until his voice was raw. Sarah held Tom, sobbing, her eyes locked on the dark windows of the cabin. She could have sworn she saw a flicker of movement in the upstairs room, a shadowy form briefly silhouetted against the glass. Watching them, they never found Lily. The police searched for weeks, but the lake kept its secrets. The Astons left and never looked back, a family fractured by a grief that no one else could understand. The Blackwood cabin returned to its silence, standing sentinel by the water. Locals say that on quiet nights, if you dare to get close enough, you can still hear things. The faint sound of a child's laughter carried on the wind, the creak of a rocking chair on the porch, and the distorted melody of an old nursery rhyme. They say the cabin is still watching, its windows like hollow eyes scanning the lake, waiting for its next visitor, waiting for a new family to share its suffocating darkness. Some places don't just hold memories. Some places are hungry, and the cabin by the lake is starving. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from the shadows. Stay safe out there. Elias Crow had been a fisherman long enough to know the ocean has moods. It can be silent, it can be hungry, and on some nights, it has a kind of listening quality. It's like something just beneath the waves is waiting for the wrong sound, waiting for its chance to reveal itself. On the northern coast of Harrington Bay, where he'd lived his entire life, the old men whispered about a trench just offshore. They called it the Listening Deep. They said the water there wasn't normal, that it didn't just swallow what fell into it, he'd remembered it. Elias never paid much attention to those stories. Not until the night the sea took his son, Noah. It was a clear evening, calm waters, no wind, yet Noah's small fishing boat drifted too close to the trench. Witnesses claimed they saw his flashlight spin wildly in the dark, then heard a scream cut short. And then, the boat returned to shore, drifting empty, as if someone had simply stepped off the world. From that day on, Elias never slept more than an hour at a time. Some nights, he'd wake up feeling like someone was sitting at the edge of his bed, breathing salt and cold into the room. Some mornings, he'd find puddles of seawater leading from his front door down the hallway. He told himself it was just grief, exhaustion, his imagination running wild. But the sea had taken his boy, and the sea does not return what it claims. Not whole, and not human. One night, 3 months after Noah vanished, Elias decided he couldn't take it anymore. He had to go out to the trench. Alone. Harrington Bay slept early, so no one saw him push his boat from the shore with trembling hands. The moon hid behind clouds, as if it refused to witness what he was about to do. Once he reached the open water, Elias cut the engine and let the tide pull him toward that place, where the ocean went blacker than black. The deep seemed to breathe. A slow, rhythmic, unnatural pulse. He whispered Noah's name into the darkness. The waves answered with soft laps against the hull, like fingers drumming impatiently. Elias felt a sudden, biting cold, as though the night had peeled open and something unseen had stepped into the world. His lantern flickered, 10 stadiot, casting a dim circle of light that only made the surrounding darkness feel deeper, more absolute. He leaned over the edge of the boat, expecting to see only his own reflection staring back at him. Instead, he saw something pale, drifting just below the surface. It was a hand, thin, another, then a face. Noah's face, staring up at him, eyes wide and glassy. mouth hanging open as if still trying to form words long after breath had stopped. Elias stumbled backward, choking on his own breath, shaking his head violently. It had to be a hallucination, a cruel trick of his grieving mind. But then, the thing in the water blinked. Its lips twitched, and then, in a perfect mimic of Noah's voice, it said, "Dad, help me." Elias froze. The voice was wrong. It was hollow-stretched, layered beneath a strange sound of clicking and gurgling, like bones grinding together underwater. The creature lifted itself higher, its shoulders breaking the surface. Its skin hung like wet cloth, with parts swollen and other parts sunken, as if the ocean had tried to reshape him. But the eyes, they weren't Noah's. They were ancient, hungry, studying Elias with a chilling curiosity. And then more pale faces began to surface around it. Men, women, children, all with eyes that were too reflective, mouths to still, their bodies swaying in the water like seaweed pulled by some unseen current. They whispered his name over and over. Hundreds of voices, all of them wrong. Elias grabbed the boat rail to steady himself, but the metal felt slick, oily. He looked down and saw that, water-thick, black, and greasy, was creeping over the edges. It wasn't splashing in. It was climbing, crawling up the sides like a living thing. The temperature dropped so sharply that his breath came out as white mist. The boat groaned, as if the weight of something enormous was pressing against its underside. The water around him bulged unnaturally, rising in a swelling dome. A shape moved beneath it, vast, shifting, and horribly alive. The pale corpses were merely its surface decoration, puppets animated by whatever massive intelligence lurked in the deep. Elias fumbled for the fuel can. If he was going to die here, he was going to take this abomination with him. But the creatures sensed his intent. The mimic of Noah lunged upward, its arms stretching far too long, its fingers splitting into thin tendrils that slithered along the boat's floor. Elias kicked them away, grabbed the can, and splashed fuel across the wooden boards. The sharp smell cut through the air, overpowering the scent of salt and rot. The voices grew agitated, shifting from whispers to frantic, high-pitched screeching. The massive shape in the water rose higher, its many pale faces merging into one grotesque, shifting mask of agony and hunger. Elias grabbed a flare. His hands shook. His lungs seized in the cold. The tendrils wrapped around his boot, tightening their grip. He lit the flare anyway. The sea roared not, with the sound of waves, but with 1,000 voices as the flare slipped from his hand and ignited the fuel. Fire raced across the deck, jumped to the water, and spread across the oily surface like a floating inferno. The pale faces screamed as the flames devoured them, melting and collapsing back into the depths. The massive shape beneath thrashed, sending violent waves crashing against the boat. Elias was thrown into the burning water. For a moment, he felt the creature beneath him, something so old and massive that the ocean itself seemed shaped around its existence. It brushed against him, not as an attack, but as a promise. He managed to crawl back onto the half-burning wreck and drifted for hours until rescuers found him at dawn. They dragged him to shore, half-conscious, and wrapped him in shivering blankets. As he stared at the sunrise, Elias felt a vibration under the sand beneath his feet, a subtle pulse, like a heartbeat echoing from deep below. The ocean was watching him. The ocean remembered, and the ocean did not forgive. From that day on, strange things began washing ashore. Pieces of boats that had been sunk for decades, tangled nets filled with pale limbs, and once, a child's boot that Elias recognized instantly. It was Noah's boot. Fresh, untouched by decay. The sea was sending him reminders. He realized then that revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient. It creeps back with each tide. Sometimes the deep doesn't come for you in a storm, it waits until you're alone. And now, when Elias lies in bed at night, the sound of the waves outside his window no longer soothes him. They whisper, they listen, and sometimes they call his name.